Hello and welcome to a Lore Divers special episode. Baldur's Gate, the descent of Avernus, the descent into Avernus is out, and some may be wondering about this storied location. So this special episode is covering the city of Baldur's Gate and all of its unique information. Well, not all of it, most of its unique information and information about its unique position in the Forgotten Realms. Now, before we start, if you haven't done so yet, please like and subscribe. And if you dig what I'm doing, please consider supporting me on either Coffee or Patreon. So let's get into it. My name is Graham, and I'm here to be your guide tonight into the lore of Baldur's Gate. So, we'll start out with a quick overview here. Pretty straightforward. What's the place's name? Well, it's called Baldur's Gate or The Gate. Some creative naming policies there. Good times. Dates of existence. So, Baldur's Gate is hard to pin down when it was actually founded. In fact, the best description that I found was actually in the olden times, where it was founded by an adventurer named Baldur. And it's been a perpetual presence on the Sword Coast well into the modern era since the olden times. So at some point in the distant past, up to right now in the game. The year, I believe, is 1492 or possibly 1494, somewhere in there. Geospatial information, near and dear to my heart, because I love doing mapping for gaming. So it is located south of Waterdeep. It's north of both Candlekeep and Amn, and it's arguably the southernmost power in the Sword Coast region before you hit the Lands of Intrigue. And Lands of Intrigue, of course, being Tether, Am, and Calimshan. It's several miles up the Chionthar River. I'm probably mispronouncing that terribly, but I am willing to accept that. Which empties into the Sea of Swords. Across the sea to the west are the Moonshae Isles, and to its east is the new nation of Eltergard, which is ruled by paladins of Torm, and these guys crop up a lot in this area, and they do not have a good history. Not because they're bad people, but because they're just bad at being paladins. And to their north, I should have mentioned this as well, there's also the Serpent Wood and all that sort of good stuff. So there's a whole lot of adventure going on north of the place. The city itself is divided into a rich, powerful, and well-protected upper city, and a scummy, violent, and extremely risky lower city. So kind of a conventional fantasy, upper class, lower class thing going on there. The outside of the place is currently packed with refugees from El Terrell. And by the way, this is going to be a little spoilery for the Descent into Avernus, so if you haven't played that yet, there's going to be a few spoilers in here. Not major ones, not plot-breaking ones or anything else like that, but just little things that happen in the book that you will be finding out during the course of the very beginning of the adventure. I should have mentioned that right off the top. My apologies. Anyways, so the most organized, safest, and most defensible area outside the walls is the uncreatively named Little Calimshan. And I don't know what's going on with some of the writing that happens with this, but I mean, just calling something a Little Calimshan, or in other instance, a shoe town, instead of as a standard for Chinatown. Come on, there's better ways to name things that go a lot better. Anyways, it was established for refugees fleeing the Genie and Genazi-fueled conflicts to the south. It is walled, organized, and arguably safer and more lawful than Baldur's Gate proper in a lot of ways. But it's not without its own issues. Because, of course, you have to have something going on. It is a fantasy world after all. Now, its history and additions is actually really stable. It was a very nice surprise. As I went through it, through 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and finally into 5th, the description of Baldur's Gate remained remarkably consistent throughout all the years it's been described, in both its description, location, general layout, even its nature remained fairly static. However, it's also been subject to some weird interpretations through the years, which I chalk up to the dissonance between its short description as an open and accepting city and the deeper lore and information. But it first appeared in the Forgotten Realms box set, and it's been in the same place more or less the whole time. Let's see, you got a question here. Eltergard episode in the future. Yes, there will be an Eltergard episode in the future. I am planning to do basically place episodes after I finish the Arcane Age. And so Eltergard will be one of the locations covered in one of those episodes. Now, history as presented. So this is what I got trawling through various books. And of course, always a favorite of mine, the Grand History of the Realms. So in Unknown Dale Reckoning, in the olden times, before, there was Baldur's Gate, settlement was established. It's sort of nebulous. It borders on happening in a mythic past sort of thing, even though it's not that far in the past. Nothing I was able to find gave concrete dates for when the city was founded, or even its predecessor village. It's all centuries ago and in the distant past. So after this unknown founding of a village there, but another unknown date, prior to 865 DR, there was Baldur, a noted seafarer and adventurer who sailed past Evermeet to see what was there and ended up bumping into Ankarome. Now, for those of you who don't know, Ankarome is the Forgotten Realms analog for North America. As I've said in the past, the Forgotten Realms has become sort of an analog for Earth. This was not as I discovered after a long Twitter discussion with Ed Greenwood, it was not planned originally to be such. However, after he turned it over to TSR and it was later inherited by Wizards, they sort of ran in different directions than his original plan. And so Ankarome became the North American analog for the world. And he landed there. His voyage was successful. It took heavy casualties, and he returns with treasure. It doesn't say what kind of treasure or anything else like that, but he just comes back with a whole whack of cash, and he uses this to build a city wall, and one of the gates in it is named Baldur's Gate in his honor, and it ends up, this becomes the name of the city, all that sort of thing. He does return to Ankarome to try to get more treasure, and does not come back. Now, it can be surmised based on the description of the fort in 1364 DR, and this is actually something that comes up inside the Grand History of the Realms, is that the fact that a wooden fort still has recognizable rusted weapons and armor in it. The olden times were probably around between 600 and 700 DR, somewhere in there. Largely because the Shun Imperium doesn't factor in, and there's no epic, magic, or arcane age sorts of influences. So it's after the Arcane Age has ended and is outside of the region of time that the Shun Imperium was a big thing, and that was a giant empire out of Kalimshan. So it was after those things, but before the first concrete date that we have, which is 865 DR, which is the first mention of Baldur's Gate as a city and political entity existing on its own. And they immediately get into links to the Dead Three, that being Baal, Myrakal, and all that sort of good stuff. I forget the name of the other one. Sorry, my little one's not feeling well, so I've got my phone set to vibrate here in front of me in case I need to go running upstairs and put all this on pause. So the links to the Dead Three kick off, and in particular, Baal and his Baal spawn. Baal spawn are basically Baal's like ace in the hole to ensure that he survives into the future. And what he's doing is he basically like creates a bunch of like semi-demigods and punts them out into the world, with the idea being that if anything happens to him, these little fragments of himself, one of them will eventually, metamorph into a new him. Not a bad plan, actually, and especially given that the Baal did get killed. Bane, that was the other of the Dead Three. It's Bane, Myrakal, and Baal. It was actually a good plan. So that's it for a long time. Like, you've got 865 DR and then nothing until 1315 DR. And that's when they start talking about armies from Baldur's Gate and Waterdeep. So an unlikely alliance between two major trading powers on the Sword Coast. pardon me, who go out and clear out Dragonspear Castle. Now, Dragonspear Castle is on the south edge of the High Moor, which is an incredibly dangerous area on the Sword Coast. It was once the home to a beautiful dark elf city and civilization until Sun Elves decided it was war crime o'clock and wiped it off the face of the planet. Now it's full of serpent folk, yuan ti, monsters, and on the southern edge of it is Dragonspear Castle. So they go there, they clear the place out, and for some reason that can't be explained, decide that neither of them wants to occupy this fortification, and that instead they are going to set up a monastery to, I believe it was Torm, and let his clergy deal with anything that happened. And the results are pretty predictable. Things do not go well. So next up, 1351 DR, so jumping forward ahead in time again, adventurers break into a tomb and bring some plague back to Baldur's Gate. Not a good time. It spreads rapidly through the area. A whole lot of sad people. The moral of the story is, if you're breaking into tombs to make a living and you're in a fantasy world, some form of, biohazard protection is probably a good idea. Or at least like some hygiene and exposure plans, because nothing good's in an ancient tomb that's full of undead monsters. Like, nothing. Well, that finishes up. And finally, 1356, Dragonspear Castle 2. They go back. Apparently, there's a portal to the place that leads into either the Abyss or the Hells or something like that. And, actually, they cleared out devils, so that would be the Hells. So the place is occupied by devils, and they clear it out again, and then don't occupy it again. Because, it was full of monsters, and it took 2 armies to clear them out, and then it was full of, devils, and that wiped out a monastery of Torm. So why occupy the place? Why put that effort in? What could possibly happen? You'll find out in a moment. So, 1364 DR. This is where things get kind of interesting, and this is when Baldur's Gate actually starts to reach out into the larger world. Excited by the discovery of Mazdaca, and discovery in quotes there because there's already people there, the Flaming Fist Mercenary Company decides that it's time to get in on this colonization thing. And it's a really weird operation because they're technically representing Baldur's Gate, but the city itself didn't put any of the money up for any of this, so it's just kind of their mercenary company doing their own thing. And so they want to get in on this colonization, and they decide that the 2 best places to do this are across the ocean and then in Chult for some reason. Not some reason. At that point, Chult had sort of reopened, and I believe Mesro had reappeared. So people were actually like, oh, wow, we can trade with these people again. And so they set out, and just everything goes sideways. The fleet that goes to Ankaromi, they lose most of it after parking over what can only be described as a Shahagwin kingdom. And apparently Shahagwin were not happy about that and just wiped the floor with these guys. And they finally, they find Balurian's fort, or Belleran's fort. They're like, wow, this place is a mess. And then they get attacked by First Nations, Native American caricatures in the form of savage elves. It's just exhausting. Anyways, they establish Fort Flame in Ankaromi, and Fort Balurian in Chult. Fort Balurian is overrun and destroyed a few times, but is always rebuilt, because why not? And both exist at least up until the Spell Plague, with Fort Flame being noted as not doing too well, and Fort Balurian sort of just hanging on. And Fort Balurian we know exists in 5e because it was part of the Tomb of Annihilation. So, 1368 DR, war with Amn over iron is narrowly avoided despite the efforts of a ball spawn. And this ball spawn poisoned iron mines. I'm not sure how you do that, but they did it. And it was a war over iron, the two of them, because they're trading iron weapons or something. And this starts to get into the rivalry that they have with, let's see here, yeah, Comet Magic. Yeah, that's pretty much how you'd have to poison it, I guess. They get into the whole, like, how they have a rivalry with Amn. And I don't fully understand this because Amn is a nation with like multiple cities, a much larger population, and that is like an active trading nation. And as I'll get into in a bit, Baldur's Gate is just like a hub. They're placed on a river that people have to use at the moment, and so they basically have to tax all the trade. So they're not actively trading themselves. They're just sort of like taxing people for all the trade that's happening there. So I don't really get that. 1369 DR, the 12th Saros War breaks out and shipping is affected. So the Saros Wars are these like massive underwater conflicts because there's like the whole underwater world in the Forgotten Realms that sort of like falls by the wayside way too often. And yeah, like the 12th Saros War breaks out and shipping everywhere is affected because the oceans are not safe to cross. 1374 DR, the Anchorome colony is noted as struggling. And this is also the year that the events of the first Baldur's Gate computer game occur. So if you played the Baldur's Gate games, you know what happens. I'm not going to get into it because that's like a whole episode unto itself. Suffice to say, risk aversion in the deep past resulted in a commander who was betrayed, and there's like she came back as an undead, and a bunch of stuff goes horribly wrong. Anyways, that's that video game. 1376 DR, the events of Baldur's Gate 2 occur. And so this is one of the lieutenants of the last bad guy having a go at it. There's vampires. They turn everyone in the city into zombies. It's wild. But it gets fixed and life goes on. And then there's not a lot of information I was able to find after that. So assuming, they managed to make it through everything relatively okay until the Spell Plague. And then in 1479 DR, so this is like 4th edition, it is the most populous city in Faerun. And the reason it is because they had a ton of refugees show up and accepted most of them, or at least like let them live around the place. So it has a very large population. Nothing major sort of happened to it. There was no danger around it or anything else like that. So, yeah, they made it through okay. And they're now huge. 1482 DR, things go sideways. Baal is reborn in Baldur's Gate amongst chaos and bloodshed, as it's revealed that one of their dukes is actually a Baal spawn, who then apotheoses, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, into Baal, reborn. Murders and killings have been unabated since then. Yeah, this place is packed with cults, especially to the Dead 3. It is bad news. Lots of people dying. We're almost done here. So 1492 DR. So this is the nominal year of the book itself. Its only rival on the west coast of Faerun is Waterdeep, with Amn and Kalimshan still both recovering from the events of the era of upheaval. Dragonspear Castle is occupied by a significant undead force and has a giant supernatural fog hanging over it. And it's also, once again, posing a major threat to the area because, why occupy the place and keep that sort of nonsense out? Also, things have soured with Elturgard. They were sort of nominally allies during the era of upheaval. Era of upheaval ends. Elturgard is not on good terms with them anymore. And the events of the descent into Avernus occur. So you've got undead 3 cultists loose throughout the city, killing, murdering, causing all sorts of eternal strife. Refugees from the fallen Elturel are surrounding the place, and Baldur's Gate's response has been to lock them out and seal up the city. So, pardon me, the city itself is sealed. Nobody's getting in, nobody's getting out, except for trade through the sea gates, and things are going sideways. The city's effectively a corrupt police state under an oligarchy, and there's a very real concern that the place could be sucked into the hells. And now, leaping way into the future, because this is the thing I've been noticing is happening more with Forgotten Realms, 1592 DR, or thereabouts. So 100 years in the future. This is when the events of Baldur's Gate 3 occur. That's the video game that's coming out pretty quickly, which had all sorts of Illithid mind flayer action going on. Yeah, so the city's under attack by Illithids, and spoilers, this is supposed to be very loose. This is supposed to be prequeled in The Descent into Avernus. Now, I've read through that book, and I did... I only found one mention of mind flayers at all in it, and it was like one of the dukes is under the influence of one right now, or is trying to fight them off. That was the only mention of them I could find in there. So if The Descent into Avernus is the prequel to Baldur's Gate 3, it is an incredibly weak prequel. Just like, wow, like barely a prequel at all. So, on to the general culture. Now, this city, Baldur's Gate, it's noted as being open and accepting, and that's written a lot, and it's usually in like the first couple of paragraphs you're going to read about the city. And this needs to be sort of caveated, because they're open and accepting when it benefits them. For example, this has been turned on its head with the destruction of El Turel. You know, it's like a city was literally sucked into hell, and they just like lock all these people out. And they benefited from all, and even when they were taking refugees during the era of upheaval, they still weren't taking all of them. Only a fraction of those people actually got to go into the city, and the rest of them were like locked out. Like for example, like almost all the Kalashites were prohibited from entering, even though they were actually traders. Like they had trade goods. They were like, yeah, like we want to set up shop in your city, and they're like, yeah, sorry, you guys are too brown, get out. It's probably something along those lines. And so they set up outside the city and are now like their own little walled mini fort. And this sort of like repeats a lot throughout it. And like they're using right now in the Descent into Avernus, using the refugee crisis as an excuse to crack down on everything. So open and accepting is more on the lines of, if you have money, trade goods, and or can do something for us in the long term, you're welcome to stay. If you're not, stay out, or like you're welcome to visit, then get out. And in a lot of ways, the place is effectively lawful neutral at best and lawful evil most of the rest of the time. The place is unfailingly and often cruelly lawful, regardless of circumstances, but at the same time, it's a haven for smugglers and pirates, so there's a acceptable level of corruption, which is seen as being okay and as being lawful in that location. And so, yeah, open accepting, yeah. You know, it's as long as your corruption is done right, it's okay. It's also a center for Gond's worship on the Sword Coast, a little bit of an unusual thing there. They've got a giant temple, so there's lots of technology going on. And finally, the place has ongoing issues with murder cults, devils, demons, and all that sort of stuff. And it's on a scale past any sorts of norms for a D&D city. Like, you don't see this happening in Waterdeep. You don't see this happening in Suzale. You don't see this happening anywhere else. It's just like a Baldur's Gate issue. Now, groups of note. First off, there's the Flaming Fist Mercenary Company. And they stand out more than most because they're going to be the group the players are most likely to interact with, like right off the hop, more than Thieves Guild, more than other guilds or the crews or anything else like that. Okay, they're effectively a combination of like a paramilitary police force and the Foreign Legion, to use a real world analog. They're mercenaries that are inexorably linked to Baldur's Gate. They're also the leading force in Baldur's Gate's colonization efforts in Ankh-Morpork and Chult, which is sort of where I see the Foreign Legion analogies there, with Foreign Legion's operations in Algeria and Vietnam, respectively, and you know their failed operation in Mexico, which would be a link to what's happening in Ankh-Morpork. Aside from the no mercenary work against Baldur's Gate and don't burn down the lower city, there's not a lot of operational or ethical restrictions on this unit. They are not... The Flaming Fists are not good people in any way, shape, or form. They are lawful for the most part, but evil, like lawful evil, neutral evil, lawful neutral, like that sort of range. So like they will do bad things in a heartbeat and are doing them, because they have the power to do them. The next up is the Watch, and this is a private security force for the upper city. They're essentially a second army that's 100% dedicated to the upper classes and defending them. They can be encountered anywhere in the city because they have unlimited jurisdiction over the place, but are most commonly found in the upper city or guarding people from the upper city as they travel around, like to the point where they clear out everybody who's not a resident of the upper city, a staff member who's supposed to be there after hours, or someone who has like a written invitation. Like that's the level of operation these guys are at in the upper city. And finally, there's the criminal, and I call them semi-criminal organizations. So there's the usual thieves guild sorts of operations there, and these come and go quite rapidly in Baldur's Gate, and I feel that's because of their sort of acceptable level of corruption that they work with. It makes it hard to have a thieves guild there, because even though the place is lawful, there's no real reason to be under the radar about what you're doing, as long as you're sort of like pay your taxes on it. So there's that, and this sort of situation has also formed the crews, and crews are kind of like a combination of like guild teams slash gangs that are operating, and they're all over the place. And so you're going to encounter these guys quite a bit in your games when you're playing, if you're using the descriptions as given in Descent into Avernus. So, known successor states and colonies. So Baldur's Gate has no successor states. Since it continues to exist, it is not fragmented yet. So no successor states there. They do have two colonies, though, both established Foreign Legion style by their mercenary army, the Flaming Fists. So there's Fort Flame, which is established on the coast of Ankarome, north of the Amnian colony slave states of Mazdaca. And I say that because they are slave states. And until something comes out in 5th edition saying that like the Mazdakans have like overthrown their Amnian overlords in that interim period where they were not on the planet, that's still how it is. And it's awful. So the place was struggling, subject to attacks by savage elves. I just so lazy in the creativity and writing there. Anyways, its status in 5th edition is unknown because we don't know what's going on with Ankarome or with Mazdaca in general. Like we just don't know what's going on with them. And until we do, the status of Fort Flame is unknown. Now, Fort Balurian, on the other hand, it was established inland at the base of a peninsula that juts northward from Chult proper, and it's north of Port Nyanzaru. Like Fort Flame and Ankarome, it was established by force and held via force of arms. It is marginally more successful. I put quotes around it in my notes here. Like it's successful than Fort Flame, but it's also under like a perpetual risk of attack. And it's notable that for all of its trade prowess, Baldur's Gate is remarkably sessile and complacent in its actual trade efforts and colonial aspirations. There's effectively no civilian component in either of the colonial efforts, and their attempts to build up trade with them is minimal. So they're basically just sort of like squatting on the river and letting trade come to them. You could even think of them as just like pirates using land. Yeah. Just taxing people. It's like, hey, oh yeah, you want to use the river? Cool. Pay us some money. You want to trade here? Awesome. We'll need a cut of that. So, now the fun part. My take on the place. So, Baldur's Gate is a good location for a lot of things, but it isn't well connected to the rest of the world. I mean, as someone pointed out on Twitter, in one of the many threads I was involved with, there is no cultural exchange through the through trade on this in the world. There's no reflection of how these places can interact, and the places, like, it's described as being neutral in such a way that it makes them weaker. And so this is what I would do to add some more fun to the place. First off, more hazards. Let's make the place more dangerous. I want to see. I would want to see spy conflicts with Amnian agents. Like this place is supposed to be in a perpetual trade war with Amn, and that means there's like spies, spy networks, cloak and dagger sorts of things. Like there should be a whole underworld undercurrent of stuff going on between them and Amn. That's just like awesome, like spy stuff. Pardon me. Lots of like trying to sabotage each other, trying to like one up each other, all that sort of thing. Next, messing around in Dragon Spear Castle and its environs. It's like it's right there on the right there by the moor. This draws all sorts of attention. First and foremost, there's the undead angle. Like Dragonspear Castle's packed with an undead, being led by some incredibly powerful form of undead, or like super necromancer or something like that. And this is all coming from like 4th edition, and it was awesome. Like there's some sort of like haze over the place, so it's perpetually night for all intents and purposes. So like vampires could operate during the day. And that's a huge regional threat. And now they've sealed their city up, an organized undead outbreak would devour the city. And I think that is a great threat to have looming over the place, or like something to add into your game. To have like, oh yeah, like there's been like people are like, maybe sewer teams have noticed zombies or something like that, or ghouls are prowling around the place, or something's going on, and all of a sudden you have an undead outbreak inside of a city that has sealed itself up. Like, yeah. Next up, Yuan Ti. I've talked about Yuan Ti back in the Peoples of Chult series, and like the Highmoor, they're there. Like the Serpent Hills, all that sort of stuff. Like there are enclaves of Yuan Ti all through the area, and Baldur's Gate is a dream target for them. Okay, there's like I said, there's a whole bunch of them up by Dragonspear in the area around Dragonspear Castle. Baldur's Gate is already rife with corruption, and like getting Yuan Ti influence into there is just a no-brainer. They've done it before. Like if you read up about the city of Hlondeth, yeah, like they have corrupted an entire city before to the point where they didn't have to hide themselves anymore. And given Baldur's Gate already has all are welcome to trade as long as it's non-harmful thing going on, the Yuan Ti may even be able to like just set themselves up there as merchants, offering whatever crazy serpent magic items, unique animals, whatever that they can, and wouldn't even have to hide. Like they could just walk around openly and live their Yuan Ti lives, corrupting the hell out of the place, and like getting into the oligarchies, all that sort of thing, because like that's what they do, and they're right there. Plus, Baldur's Gate, further south than the Highmoor, probably warmer. They'd probably enjoy that a lot more than hanging out in the Highmoor. So yeah, like I would put Yuan Ti into the place and just have them be Yuan Ti, taking it over, causing problems. The next thing I would do, I would make them an actual trade power. So right now, they're sort of a hub or an exchange. As a result, they are phenomenally vulnerable to any sort of sudden change in the conditions that it's currently surviving in. Like you could think of it as like a fish that needs to have water within like a very narrow range of temperature. And if it changes, they're done. That's what Baldur's Gate is right now. I mean, like, Am could choose to hire a bunch of elementalists, redirect the Chionthar River, and that would kill the city. Like, in a heartbeat. Like, they would lose their fishing fleet, they would lose the overwhelming bulk of the trade that comes through. Everything would come apart immediately. And it is, like, they wouldn't even have to come near this, like, Baldur's Gate wouldn't even know what was happening until the river stopped flowing. So they need to be more proactive. And I mean, I get it, like they're supposed to be neutral, but this neutral stance is a huge weakness. They need to be active. They need to be out there, wheeling and dealing, making alliances, cutting deals, trying to get trade, and especially like trying to develop different ways to trade. Recognizing that being on a river in a world where magic exists is absolutely not a guarantee that you're going to be able to continue trading the way that you like to. I mean, like, even though they're members of the Lord's Alliance, that's not going to matter if they've got no river left. So, actual trade power, not a transit point, out there and active, like trade missions, embassies, everything else like that. So, like, they be the Sembia of the Sword Coast for all intents and purposes. Now, their colonies. Oh my god. Scrap them or make them actual colonies. Now, I know it may sound weird coming from me because I've got posts about decolonization. And so I got a comment here. Neutral doesn't have to mean passive. Exactly. But that's how they are. They're passive. They're so passive. It doesn't make any sense, especially when they're mercantile. So, as I say, like, it may sound weird coming to me. Like, I've written posts about decolonization and all that sort of stuff. And, like, seriously, like, I understand that colonization, like trade colonization, is a thing that's happened. It's happened in the real world in the past in non-harmful ways, and that it's possible. But, like, you have to do something to make it work properly. Because right now, they have 2 military outposts in faraway lands that between the 2 of them might break even on a good season. Might. Okay? That's not how a mercantile operation works. Like, these guys are all about the dollars and cents. And so, like, for the Flaming Fist to be maintaining these 2 forts, one of which involves, like, a multi-week sea voyage across hostile seas to get to, and they're not even breaking even. No, like, people that they're not, they would pull a pin on that in a heartbeat. So they either have to get serious about it or just drop the concepts entirely. Fort Flame is the worst offender, mostly because Ankh-Rome is profoundly underdeveloped. In fact, the only book that I've found that has any significant information about that continent in it was, I believe it's called, like, For Glory and Gold. It was a 2nd edition splat book for mercenaries, I believe. I think if I'm remembering this right. And it talked about, in the Flaming Fist section, it talks about Ankh-Rome. And I believe there was a mention in a Mazda book. Maybe? I can't remember. I got some notes on it somewhere, where it talked very briefly about, like, Ankh-Rome and how there had been an incredibly powerful magical civilization there at some point, but that they were gone, and it's just like the ruins of their civilization and these weird magic golems wandering around. Anyways, there's nothing there that can't be had elsewhere for dramatically less danger and risk. And of the 2 forts, it's easily the most problematic because of the, like, just profoundly racist writing about the threats in the area to them that went into its creation. Like, it was just, even for 2nd edition, it was bad. I would just fold it. I would get rid of that one entirely. Now, if it were retained, I would at least try to break the standard colonial model and have them not replay the colonization of North America in the same way that the, like, colonization of South America was replayed in Mazda. I would put some thought into it, try to develop it, and maybe make it not so awful. But as it stands, I think the best thing to do with that one would just be to fold it and call it a day. Now, Fort Baldur. Fort Baldur needs to go. It's not doing anything. It's not sited well to survive. Like, it's in a defensible position from the perspective of the people inside the fort are likely to survive an attack. But it's also sited in such a way as if they need to flee, they are unlikely to be able to make it to the beach alive to escape. And also there's no, like, port or docks or anything. They're sort of like dropped off, rowed in, and good luck. And like, to be honest, if you've taken any of the things that I talked about concerning Chaltons back in series 1 to heart, they'd waste the place. I mean, it's not doing anything, and it's just like it's a place where you send troops to die, for all intents and purposes. And that's not the sort of thing that a mercenary company that needs to make money is going to maintain. Especially because it's like far away from literally everything of value. And rules as read, there's apparently no Chaltons living outside of Port Nyanzaru, which is just a bizarre thing to me. But if you have to retain it, and I did give some thought to this, if it's going to be retained, it needs to have value to the locals. So basically, there has to be a reason why the Chaltons, Terramen, Lizard Folk, and everybody else haven't wiped the place off the map, or just sat back and watched the zombies eventually like tear it apart, or watch everyone get eaten by dinosaurs or whatever. And if it's going to have value, it means that it needs to rival Port Nyanzaru, which is the Amnian trade enclave. And even though the book says, they're now free and running their own show, they're still very much beholden to Am for pretty much everything, trade-wise, material-wise, and everything else like that, because there's nothing really coming in to Port Nyanzaru. Now, in this case, what does that mean? That could mean supporting Chaltons who are rebelling against Port Nyanzaru or against the merchant oligarchy that's running the place right now. It could possibly mean supporting the Ashowe and their attempts to become unified people again because of all the magic they have and could have access to. That could be a huge thing. But it definitely means supporting the retaking of Omu. Why Omu? That's at the bottom of the continent, you say. Not continent, the bottom of the peninsula. Trade. That's the reason. Hey? Aiding in the retaking and resettling of Omu means that they have a friendly power in the area, one with a lot of resources to trade, and one that would be disposed to make good deals with them because they helped them retake the city. Now, one of the issues that I pointed out in my Tomb of Annihilation write-up was that the only person who seemed to care about retaking Omu, out of like all the people in Chult, was that one princess who was hanging out with the Aor Kokra. And if you do this, all of a sudden she has a power that's backing her to take back her city and take back her lands. All of a sudden you have a rival for Port Nyanzaru. You have a trade partner. You have all these cool things happening, and Chult becomes cooler as well. But from the Flaming Fist's perspective, if they do this, they'll face a short-term heavy losses in both probably manpower and treasure, with long-term gains from having a friendly power in Chult willing to trade with them. So that's what I would do with Fort Balurian if you had to retain it. Now, is there anything else that I would do with the place? Oh, in general, I would play up some of the more unique aspects of it. For example, what are the Eltergard refugees doing? People seldom just sit around and wait for stuff to happen, especially in a magical fantasy world. So are they planning to retake their lands? Are they building their own little fortified homes to live in? What's going on with them? Like there needs to be some movement there. And the other thing I would do is, like, to be honest, I would do something with Little Kalimshan. Like, it's a terrible name, but it's a very cool concept, and I would build on it and expand on it. It's the first big mention of anything to do with Kalimshan since the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, and so why not make it do a bit more? Especially because, like, they've got all this magic going on, they have those other things. There's no reason not to have some Genasi there as well, because apparently a huge portion of the population of Kalimshan were actual secret Genasi and were transformed into them when the genies came back for the war that was going on. So there's a lot of cool stuff you could do there, and I think that developing those sorts of things, while not great in the sense that it's this ethnic enclave in the style of what's happening in North America because of, and the West in general, because of prejudice and stuff like that. The flip side of the coin, it's at least something that gives a toehold in the region for people to play characters from Kalimshan and characters from that part of the world. So yeah, that's my take on what I would do with Baldur's Gate as presented. And I don't want to go into a lot of the stuff to do with its monster and demon problems and stuff like that, just because that all comes out in all that's covered in the Descent into Avernus. And when I write up a review for that, you'll see what I think about what's going on there. So, what's going on with the next episode? Next week, that's right, next week, Series 2, The Arcane Age commences. The Arcane Age is the amazing era right up to like minus 340 something DR when Karsus screwed everybody over. But like 10th, 11th, and potentially 12th level magic exists. The world is radically different. There's amazing empires, there's cool stuff. And very little about it is known by a lot of people. And also, the way it was designed was not very well integrated. So I'm going to be talking about it, what the places were, how they survived, who their successor states are, and more to the point, how they would integrate into a awesome, functional world in that era for you to play in. So I'm still doing a little bit of research on that, still reviewing the material. But next week, episode 1 is going to be a broad overview of the world at that time to sort of set the stage for subsequent episodes. So if you like Forgotten Realms, and if you like the idea of playing in Forgotten Realms when it was legit high fantasy, like floating mountaintops, like all that sort of stuff, giant demon wars, all that jazz, you're going to want to catch that series. So, thank you very much for listening. This has been Lore Diver, a POCGamer podcast. If you've liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. If you want to see more, please head over to my blog, POCGamer.com, and check out POCGamer on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you want to support me, there's links to my coffee on my blog and my social media, and I have a Patreon set up now as well, where you can give me long-term support if that's something that you're able to do. Hey, music was provided by purple-planet.com. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.